Welcome back, everybody. How are we doing? This is episode 2 of season 4 of What If. And if you guys have been following along the channel for a while, you kind of know what to expect by now because there are times during the live streams where a question or a concept pops up that makes you stop and kind of just go, huh. There's times throughout my day where I stop and think of these things. I told you guys I spent a little too much time, probably a lot more than I should, thinking about footy, especially Manchester United. But you know what I'm talking about, right? The moments that make you wonder, what might have been. The what if moments. That's what this series is really made to explore. That's what today's episode is here to explore. Today, though, and specifically, we take a look at player power, and particularly player power that saw a United manager get sacked back in 2019, if you guys remember. What if that wasn't the case, though? What if instead of the Manchester United board backing its marketable, shirt-selling favorite players, right, the club actually instead stood behind the manager at the time? You guys know where I'm going with this. What if Manchester United had kept Jose Mourinho in charge instead of siding with a few key players at the time? Make sure you guys like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is what we're exploring today. And let's dive right into it, you guys. So, coming out of the Louis van Gaal era, Mourinho came in and he was brought in to reestablish winning mentality and trophies. This was back in 2016. You guys remember Louis van Gaal had just won the FA Cup. Wasn't very good football. We weren't doing great in the league. And then Jose Mourinho brought in. His whole job was to bring in the winning mentality and win those trophies, which he did. In his first year, we got that Carabao Cup. And we also lifted the Europa League as well. We got to that final against Ajax, did very well. The squad at the time contained several high-profile, commercially valuable players like Paul Pogba. This was especially after his kind of big world record money return to the club. But this was also part of a worldwide shift, that saw the rise of player power. Superstars were seen now as global brands, as just as market assets, basically. The wages, the social media, the agents, all that increased player power and player influence over club decisions and narratives. And it wasn't just United, but this is a United channel, so that's what we're going with. Managers were now completely kind of operating in this landscape where the larger the personality in the dressing room and the larger their commercial value, that also meant less control for the manager. The manager was no longer the main guy, right? Jose Mourinho later himself framed this challenge publicly, arguing that player power had become an issue at top clubs. He was already not a fan of it. And United was no exception, right? There was definitely an internal power struggle at the time. We had the manager, we had the directors and the boards, and then we had superstar agents and their players as well. Like, there was this weird kind of triangle fight going on, this triple threat match. The United's board's priorities had shifted from competing on the pitch and achieving results to kind of player asset value, kit sales, global image, commercialization, marketing, brand, risk management, even in the transfer window, if you want to go down that route. This led to a lot of clashes, specifically clashes with Mourinho's ambitions for the club on the pitch and everything, but also the club's ambitions at the time behind the scenes. It created a lot of tension in the dressing room. The club was shooting for one goal, which meant they backed certain players because the players were deemed as high value assets. The club was not willing to do a lot for the managers at the time. And this also led to a clash between Mourinho and a few of the key player personalities at the time. Perhaps the most high-profile relationship that broke down was the relationship between Mourinho and Paul Pogba. Public disciplinary measures and statements, such as Mourinho stripping Pogba of the captaincy, and he's also like Mourinho. If you remember, Mourinho literally said about Paul Pogba, he will never be United captain again. This reflected a lot of really deep mistrust, and even I think Mourinho even called him a virus, if you guys remember. Now, the media reported a lot of this. There was reports of dressing room fights, Mourinho telling players to stay away from Pogba as he tried to solidify his kind of status in that dressing room amidst this fracture. Mourinho reportedly wanted to reduce Paul Pogba's status at the club, even sell him if the fractures between their relationship proved to be irreparable. Mourinho emphasized mentality and a team-first behavior at that time. Now, why did the club resist? Well, obviously, Paul Pogba had huge commercial value, huge transfer market value. Returning him to the club in 2016 for that big value represented a fee that United wanted to recoup, whether that was through shirt sales or whatever you want to call it. They're gonna, and obviously with that big fee comes a huge fear of loss if Pogba's value at the time is allowed to plummet because of negativity or benching him or whatever. There was risks of PR, agent issues, fan reactions. A lot of people were Pogba fans. Fans, there would have been backlash if we had backed Mourinho at that time and sold a world-class player in Paul Pogba, especially a homegrown former academy player as well. Now, it wasn't just Pogba. Mourinho also publicly criticized Anthony Martial for his inconsistency, called him lazy, suggested, that Mourinho wanted to sell him if the conditions were met. Martial's agent even publicly suggested that he might leave as well. Now, Mourinho reportedly either wanted to motivate Martial. Again, Mourinho had a very, unique way of trying to motivate players. Sometimes it was just tough love publicly, but he either wanted to motivate him to return to this consistency and become a starter, or just sell him, preferring outside of the Premier League as well. Now, the club resisted this moment because Martial was young. He had a lot of resale value. He was a commercial draw. The board loved him. He was a fan favorite over some of the Glazers as well. And they would prefer that he really rehabilitate his form to recoup some cash rather than sell him at a reduced value because of fractured relationship in the dressing room. Now, moving on to the next target, Luke Shaw. Mourinho questioned Luke Shaw, his maturity, his football IQ, and his consistency alongside a lot of the younger players at the time. Now, the player that Mourinho insisted he never wanted to sell despite the tensions either. So there's a little bit of back and forth here. Mourinho made this statement, though, after a draw with Everton. He had a good performance, Shaw, but it was his body with my brain. He was in front of me, and I was making every decision for him. Now, what did Mourinho want at this time? He expressed a little bit of frustration. He suggested that the younger players really needed to show more competitiveness. He wanted some more reinforcements, Mourinho, especially at that left back. The club did not go along with Mourinho at this time because of this whole narrative around Luke Shaw, the comeback story from that horrific leg break injury. You guys remember we featured that heavily in a What If episode a while back. And that made him a valuable asset. United preferred to look at Shaw as potential rather than just sell him and gamble on another replacement, even though they went on and did this without Tellez not that long after that, with Ollie. Now, Mourinho's approach to this situation didn't help matters because it became very public, very confrontational, and toxic. Now, the board chose to contain this, offer some partial support for the players in question rather than just go for an outright clear out from the dressing room. And that obviously was a big start for the way United chose to handle that situation moving forward. Mourinho's public criticism and the high-profile rows culminated in the club removing him in late 2018. You guys remember, around Christmas time. The board moved to a manager first, then player first balancing act after that. They didn't realize their mistakes until well after the fact. Media narratives didn't help. They cited, the loss of this respect in the dressing room, public managerial support. Some believe that this was the peak and the solidification at its highest strength, the player power at Manchester United. This was the moment that was, this club backs the players over everything else. Pogba, Martial, even Shaw, they had commercial value, they had brand value, they were shirt sellers, they had sponsorship leverage, global marketability as well, potentially high value in the resale aspect later on. Selling a big name asset after a public fallout doesn't help transfer fees. Patience sometimes is seen to be more financially prudent in these cases. Clubs tend to avoid public backing of manager in ways that also burn bridges with these big players and their fans as well. They often prefer quiet solutions or compromises even in these. Now, they don't want to destabilize dressing rooms. They don't want to kind of get on the wrong side of agents. Agents do have a lot of influence at the time. And the PR cost of appearing to side with a manager against big players was not something the club at the time wanted to get into. Remember, this was about, almost 10 years ago. But the question remains, is what brings us to our alternate timeline today. What if instead of backing the players and sacking Jose Mourinho, Manchester United opted to just right then and there stamp out the spark of player power before it became a full-blown flame and kind of burned that dressing room in a way. Now, this starts in the fall of 2018, this alternate timeline. This starts when things really started to get fractious in the dressing room, the period where Mourinho was sacked, right? That November, December period. And what it would take, and it starts with a public declaration of support from Manchester United, backing Mourinho, his authority in the dressing room, and basically giving him power to shape that squad any way he sees fit, starting with I think, the high-profile January sale of Paul Pogba, who was Mourinho's kind of main adversary in that dressing room at the time. If you remember, clubs like PSG, Real Madrid were heavily linked to Paul Pogba. I still think we should have sold Pogba to Real Madrid in the summer of 2018, right after France won the World Cup. I think we could have gotten easily 125, 130 million for him. A sale to PSG or maybe even a return to Juventus, which is where Pogba would have ended up joining when he left United for a free again. That would have been plausible as well. There are a lot of links there, but again, he ended up leaving on a free going to Juventus. So had this gone down, this signifies basically a tactical reset, a move to a more Mourinho typical pragmatic approach squad for the here and now that's going to deliver, not really a big focus on building for the future and amassing kind of a young squad, right? It would have been compact, it would have been structured, there would have been less kind of like creativity and individual flourishes of skill and whatnot. More emphasis on defensive organization, solidarity at the back, and kind of moving forward. And this would have sent a very clear message for manager authority. Some players who clashed probably leave, or they end up maybe accepting a lower profile role at the club. Now, what does this mean for transfers? Pogba might be gone. What does this mean? We have to replace Paul Pogba. We already had Nemanja Matic. You know, Mourinho loves Nemanja Matic. The guy follows him every club he goes to as well. He was already there. But we have to replace Pogba because Matic is not Pogba. So we need a box-to-box midfielder. And to replace Paul Pogba, I think the board finally lands its long-term kind of box-to-box center midfield target. Now, United had direct conversations with Lazio about this midfielder. You know where I'm going with this. He did come with a hefty price tag, but I think after recouping some of the Pogba money and looking at just fully backing the manager, maybe the board has a change of heart. Let's spend a little more to win something now. I think we maybe would have looked at one of Jose's favorite targets, one of the long-term United targets. I am, of course, talking about Serbian midfielder Sergej Milinkovic-Savic. Savic would have been that big money star that Ed Woodward and the Glazers loved. He was hugely popular at the time, constantly linked to moves to United, constantly linked to moves away. I think he ended up going to the Saudi League from Lazio a couple years back. I mean, that's just the way it is, I guess. But I think Mourinho uses Milinkovic-Savic as like his 8/10, his link between the double pivot and the attackers. This is assuming Mourinho still goes with a 4-2-3-1, which means United also continue with like Matic, Fred, and McTominay for a bit, a little bit of rotation behind Sergej Milinkovic-Savic. To replace Luke Shaw now, we're going to move on to left back here. Mourinho wanted Alex Sandro, if you guys remember that one. But I think United, while they did hold serious talks with Juventus back then, 60, 70 million price tag was a bit much for a left back. I think United would have ended up going with another Mourinho favorite at the time. This is another player that we really wanted, and that's Danny Rose. It was heavily reported back then that Mourinho liked Rose's mentality, and he did present a bit of a cheaper option than Alex Sandro. And I do think that's somebody that we would have gone through as well. But saving some money on that left back would have also allowed United to maybe get a replacement for Anthony Martial. And again, I think they would have gone through a long-term here and now Mourinho target, his first choice winger target at that time, and that's Ivan Perisic. Perhaps the most well-documented target for Mourinho at the time, but again, 45 million was the price that Inter wanted. United weren't prepared to do that to back a manager. Again, they backed the players at the time. Mourinho was reportedly furious with United. He felt Perisic would have completely transformed United at that time. Now, if the Glazers had conceded that Martial was ineffective, had poor fitness, lazy, and they had agreed with Mourinho's assessment of his attitude as well, I think it's pretty much a dead cert that Ivan Perisic joins United at the time. So that's Ivan Perisic replacing Anthony Martial, Danny Rose replacing Luke Shaw, and Sergej Milinkovic-Savic replacing Paul Pogba. You want to look even further out, I think that it's not improbable to maybe think that even guys like Harry Maguire or Raphael Varane would have still ended up joining United at the time. Maybe later on, both players were wanted and admired by Mourinho. Mourinho was the one who brought Raphael Varane to Real Madrid, and so on and so on. It's almost impossible to plan more than that year out, right? If Mourinho's transfer choices ended up kind of cohering, you've got senior leaders in the squad, you've got defensive solidity. United probably would have been steady top four challengers and cup winners rather than just kind of free scoring, kind of doing everything instantly. I think the board's backing of Mourinho reinforces that manager first kind of mentality. Future managerial appointments, maybe post Mourinho too, would have come maybe with similar levels of power, maybe shifting that club culture away from player led decision making at the time. The transfer policy itself starts shifting maybe towards more experienced, proven winners rather than speculative, kind of young, kind of project players. Ones for the future. I'm talking about your Ahmads, your Palestris. I'm talking like less of those signings and more of the here and nows. The team does become probably more conservative in these, especially in big away games. Mourinho does insist on tactical discipline. You're not going to see as much individual flair from young players like Rashford or Mason Greenwood at that time. I think they would have been managed a little more tightly, and I think they would have gotten opportunities, but they have to have met Mourinho's demands at that time in order for them to really nail down a starting spot. And the competition would have been tight. You probably do see a short-term dip in popularity with the fans because obviously the fans want free-flowing attacking football. They don't really like park the bus football. But I think that for some, having a clear project, backing the manager, not giving into player power, and probably becoming instant challengers and domestic cup winners does kind of sway the crowd a little bit. There are sacrifices to be made, though, for the sake of those trophies. I think Mourinho probably continues to win trophies. Again, we become a top four finisher consistently. We even probably put in a big push for the league. Mourinho did come second one year. And I do think that fans would have welcomed the club not giving in to players and backing the manager. But there is the likelihood that Mourinho's very confrontational managerial style would have eventually created this same tension and division in the dressing room. He just always needs a player that he's got to have an issue with, right? He's not happy unless there's somebody there he can pick on. And yes, his short-term and yes, expensive taste and transfer targets probably would have caught up to us as well. The coffers running low, the debt increasing, and before long, Mourinho's inevitable frustration with a lack of getting his top targets probably follows suit. I think his long-term survival at the club would have heavily depended on sustaining results year in, year out. Who knows? Perhaps Mourinho's volatility would have grown so toxic that the eventual implosion would have been even worse than what we saw. Maybe in a weird way that would have expedited the club's shift in recruitment and vision. Maybe that would have seen us start to get a handle on things much sooner. I don't know. We'll never know. But I think the evidence is there to suggest that at that time, when Mourinho has players who march to his drum, trophies do tend to follow. Like I said, he won 2 trophies his first season. I think we were in another cup final not that long after we played Chelsea, right? So the question remains, would a few years of title challenging and domestic cups have been worth if we had to sell Pogba, Shaw, and Martial in order to back Jose Mourinho? I'll let you guys decide for yourselves. But that's how I think it would have gone down based on a lot of the rumors at the time and public comments from Mourinho and whatnot. You guys let me know what you think. We'll be back again with another episode of What If soon. So hope you enjoyed that one. Make sure you like and make sure you subscribe to the channel too if you guys like what you see. Remember, Starting 11 and Legends members do get to make suggestions for ideas for these episodes. So there is a post on the channel page that only Starting 11 and Legends members can see. That's where you can leave your ideas. And if we pick one of yours, I'll make sure to give you a shout out. But until then, you guys take it easy. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you guys on the next one.